The Metrobank Girls in Cricket Fund looks to share the work of cricket clubs and their brilliant volunteers and coaches around England and Wales. That's why, as part of their Championing the Future hub on iCoach Cricket, Metrobank shares case studies of clubs that are doing an amazing job of supporting and growing their girls' cricket offering. If you want to learn from others and hear some top tips, head to icoachcricket.ecb.co.uk to create your login and check out the Metrobank resources. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast. We've got loads lined up for you on today's show. We've got Lauren on the end of the 100, her signing on for Yorkshire in the T20 World Cup's move away from Bangladesh. We've got Irish cricket journalist Nathan Johns on to talk about where Ireland are as a side following their series victory over Sri Lanka. And we've got an interview with West Indies superstar Hayley Matthews. Lauren, where do we find you this week?
I was on the wrong end of a Hayley Matthews masterclass the other night, actually. So, yeah, just over in Trinidad at the minute in the CPL. Currently watching it monsoon down. So hopefully for the game this afternoon, it'll clear up. It seems to rain every day here, but quickly dries. So fingers crossed.
Interesting. Quite a nice place to be in the summer. You've done well there. It's a short and sharp competition, isn't it? Over and done with quite quickly.
Yeah, no, it is. We're here for 8 or 9 days. 3 teams play each team twice and then a final. So, short and sharp, but it's a cool experience. Nice to be out here, and places like the Caribbean, they've just got such a great vibe. They love their cricket. The local players are absolutely buzzing and love it. So it's it's real good fun so far, and hopefully we get a decent game in tonight.
Going back to the 100, feels like a long time ago, but it wasn't quite to be for Oval in the end. You came close getting to the eliminator and falling short against the eventual champions. What was it about the Spirit that made them so good? That bowling attack in particular looked extremely difficult to get on top of.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I was never really sold on the London Spirit, on paper, especially when they lost Grace Harris. Just because of the sheer firepower. But I think it's exactly as you spoke about. Their batting lineup, got runs on the board without being hugely destructive. But they defended really well with their spin. And I think what they did do is, I think even in that eliminator game when we played at the Oval, is they got the best out of what they had. Someone like Tara Norris, Eva Gray, especially Eva Gray, almost punched above her weight at times. And I think it's all about time, timing of those competitions. And I think you saw a lot of their batters struggle at the start, but then peaked at the right time. And I think in a competition like the 100, it's so crucial to, you look at like someone like Georgia Redmayne. She almost exclusively scored all her runs at the back end. And that's the business end, isn't it? That's where you need to be sort of fit and firing. I thought the addition of Dipti Sharma was an absolute snag, and she was unbelievable for them, really. To say that she wasn't on their roster at the start, what she brought, she'd be the first name I'd be retaining next year for sure. Because she was, we obviously come to expect her to be brilliant with the ball, but I think the big shift she's made is how good she's been with the bat. And even, playing against her, she was that thorn in your side sort of player that you just couldn't get out, and found a way to score runs and be not out a lot as well. So yeah, I think they peaked at the right time. I always sensed that once they'd beaten us in the eliminator, I thought they would beat Welsh Fire in the final. I thought, there's often quite a bit on the toss in the 100, but I just feel like that team that plays and then just has to quickly get back on the wagon and go the next day, rather than almost having that time between. And Welsh Fire did have quite a few days. You can overthink it. You almost over prepare for it. Whereas when you play the eliminator, you quick rest and recover and go again. And I think sometimes that actually does benefit the teams.
Why do you think the toss is so important in the 100 compared to other competitions?
I just think I don't think teams, and I could speak on behalf of myself and my team as well, is I don't think teams quite get the tempo right in setting. I think sometimes you play it a little bit safe. and almost try to build your way into a bit of a strong finish when actually that 20 balls left, it sort of creeps up on you quite quickly. And you can possibly lay the foundation for a bit too long in setting. I still think there's a part of, yeah, like knowing which gear to be in at which time. Because we've seen a lot, the power play is obviously a very talked about part of the game. And you know that if you get runs on the board in the power play non-down, you're in a good position. But equally, if you're 3 down, it's pretty tough going. So I think there's still, erring on the side of caution when you're setting. Some teams, that's not gospel across every team. But I certainly think that that can be the way. Whereas when you're when you're chasing, you've got a template, you know which gear to be in at what time. And I think teams are more comfortable like in that scenario. I don't know what the actual stats would be, but I would imagine that a lot of tosses won would be to chase.
Yeah, no, that definitely chimes with what I saw as well. I mean, on the Spirit, on paper, lots of star names, but they weren't totally reliant on the star names. I know, as you say, Deepti Sharma had a really good tournament, but Meg Lanning had a relatively quiet one. Obviously, you got that star spin trio of Deepti Sharma, Charlie Dean, and Sarah Glenn, but it was as you mentioned earlier, the non-international players really stepping up that almost feels like the difference between teams in the 100, because every team has a set of really established international players who've got great international pedigree. But Eva Gray is someone that people don't really talk about that much, but she's an uncapped member of that bowling attack, and it's not just this year. She's had 4 pretty decent years in the 100 on the trot. What do you think it is about her bowling that has been so effective?
She hits the stumps. To put it really simply, I think she hits the stump. She's quite skiddy, so she's hard to get under. If you're about, to hit over the top, and she almost bowls that hard length that just sort of scurries through. Not particularly, you sort of think that that's a length to pull, and then all of a sudden it just sort of shoots through a little bit lower. But I think the main thing is that she keeps the stumps in play, and she's got changes of pace. So she's somebody that, she can go to her slower balls and not get hurt behind square, which I think is obviously a really good weapon to have. She was arguably their best seamer, throughout the competition. And as you said, a lot of it is how well your domestic players perform. We saw that with Paige Schofield for us, Sophia Smale, people like that. You see it, a lot in a lot of the other teams, even, Cordelia Griffiths for the London Spirit. Her accumulation of runs wouldn't be that vast, but the impact that she had in games was really important. You look at like Tilly Corteen Coleman, who we've spoken about on this podcast before, at the Brave. It is. It's how well your domestic players can perform, and they did that really well, and I think that's one of the strengths of Ashley Noffke as a coach, is he actually coaches as well. He's very clear on the brand of cricket he wants to play. He's very aggressive, hence why the elevation of Cordelia and things like that. He likes to do things a little bit less structured and more on feel of the game and reading the game. And he would have been really clear with Cords, where he'd just said, look, I basically want you to go out and whack it. And then that, the build up, the few days that you get, it would have been really clear messaging and how you train and things like that, where it's like, that's your role. Same with Eva, hit the stumps. We want you to bowl in the power play and then back end. Really clear, use your change ups. And he gives players that real role clarity. And that's not just the international players, actually more so giving the domestic players key roles.
How did you find your experience skippering?
Yeah, it was good. I mean, it's full on. But I think, like we spoke about a lot, is I was pretty blessed with a very good team with a core that was already put together. I'd have liked to have scored a few more runs. But I think like captaincy wise and how the group came together and the environment that we created and things like that, like I wouldn't have done anything differently in that sense. I thought we were really connected group and really I thought my leadership and tactics and stuff like that was pretty good. doing things a bit differently, matchups. It's not the same way the whole way. And sort of did that in accordance to the opposition that we were going up against. Yeah, I think really if with reviewing our season, it was the tied game. If we hadn't tied that game at Lords, we'd have finished top. And I do think that, we probably played enough good cricket to warrant being at the top. You look at the other two, like we beat Welsh Fire. We obviously beat London Spirit in that second outing and tied him in the first outing. So the teams that were above us, we actually beat. So yeah, it's just it's fine margins, isn't it? In the 100, it seems to be just the little tiny details, and we've spoken about it a lot. And I think that's one of the beauties of the comp. One set, one catch, or two sets in a row can completely change the course of the game. And like even just that tied game, I think we had like 6 or 7 dots in the last 10 deliveries or 12 deliveries. And yeah, like that was probably the fine margin that stopped us then going through at top and going straight to the final. But like four finals in 5 years is pretty decent going. The other thing is, I thought you probably become the franchise that people are trying to hunt down as well, with the nature of the boys doing so well, the girls doing so well. Like, it's very different being the hunter to being hunted.
Yeah.
People are coming for you. So I think there's an element of that as well. But I think the main thing is that we were better than last year. I think last year we were poor, and we didn't really live up to, Invincible's standards and performances. And this year was a bit more like it.
Yeah, it does feel like more than any other competition that 100 games in the tournament overall hinges so much more on moments, and particularly how you manage the very end of games in particular. You sometimes look at the table and you're like, how is that team so low? Because they've actually played some pretty good cricket, but they just lose just a handful of key moments in their season. Looks very different. In the men's comp, there's a lot of chat around the balls. Apparently the H on the ball makes the ball swing more, and the pitches. Did you echo those thoughts in the women's competition? Obviously using the same pitches as the men.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know when the balls changed, but it seemed to be a couple of years ago. It's certainly, I know there was a lot of talk last year that, when you're measuring degrees of swing, it swung last year more than it did the previous year. I would echo that. I think a couple of years ago, it seemed to be quite flat and didn't do much. In terms of pitches, yeah, I would agree with that. I think scores have probably come down a little bit from what they were. I think wickets lost in the power play in men's and women's has been quite high, which would suggest that it's either nipping around more or it's seaming more. So yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, we're always going to make excuses, aren't we? We just need to be better. But I do think it comes into it, in terms of the pitches, and it does feel like it swung more and seemed more, whether that's the ball or you don't know whether that's the ball or conditions or pitch. How you decipher which of the 3 factors is making that the case. I don't know how you can look at the degrees of swing, but measuring, you've still got overhead conditions to consider as well as the pitch, so it's really hard to sort of decipher which one has the biggest impact.
Yeah, it did feel like the seamers were in the game more than you normally see in a T20 game for longer. What game was it? Was it when you played Southern Brave at the Oval? I feel like did McDonald Gay bowl a spell in the middle or towards the end where they just couldn't get back on her?
She bowled a set at the end that I think went for 1. Or
Yeah.
She bowled a couple of overs that literally went for nothing, and it was still seaming around and still had good pace and carry. Yeah, we saw that. It still moved back end. Yeah, I mean, it's no easy job, is it? Like being a groundie these days with the volume of cricket, it's not easy to turn over. They essentially want flat pitches, don't they? They want runs. They want it to be a spectacle, lots of boundaries hit. And it's not easy to turn over that many pitches for the games that's, the amount of games that we're playing now. But yeah, I certainly think, whether our bowlers are getting more skilled, That's the other thing, is we always find like reasons and excuses, but who's to say that bowlers just haven't got better? Particularly in the women's game, I do think that the bowling has improved a lot. But you are right in terms of, I mean, again, I don't know the numbers, but in terms of seamers used, I know from speaking on behalf of like the ovals, is that we started the comp as we often do, whereby we bowl spin and seam in the power play, and nearly by halfway through we exclusively bowled seam because it was swinging and nipping around. So that in itself would suggest that there's a bit more in it for the seamers.
Yeah, no, definitely. A bit of news, I guess, in the last week. I've read that you're close to signing with Yorkshire. We obviously talked about what you were thinking in terms of where you're going to end up playing your cricket in 2025 earlier on in the season. Talk me through the thought process now.
Like obviously when it got announced that Yorkshire weren't going to have a tier 1 status, like I took that pretty heavy, really, because it's obviously a club that I believe deserved tier 1 status, than the way in which women's cricket's been there, and how many games have been hosted at Headingley and the structure and all that sort of stuff. So it was pretty disappointing when that happened. And obviously, like for me, in my mind, I never imagined playing my cricket anywhere else at domestic level, at least. And then, yeah, and the 2-year thing was, I pretty much had to move, 2 years. I'm still fit and firing, and I would say there's a lot of life left in me, but I am closer to the end than the start. So 2 years would have been a real push to hold on for. But sort of as it got moved to a year, I felt like there was enough years left in me to have almost like a year's grace of what that looks like from a loan point of view or whatever. I'm not like I'm playing in Oz all winter for Queensland, so it's not like I'm short of cricket. Even if I go on loan next year for 50 overs or T20 or both or one, I'm certainly not short of cricket. Yeah, it was pretty easy decision for me in the end. Like, there's some really good players and good people sticking around the club. Obviously the appointment of Richie Pyra is a really exciting one for us. He's someone that I've worked with before, when he was when it was the Super League and he was head coach there. So he's someone that I know really well, and think he's a great person, a great coach. And that was sort of the talk, really, was like, look, I really want to stay, but we've got to make this worth anybody staying. In terms of the only way you're going to attract players to stay or to come is to have the best staff that you can get. And Yorkshire were really big on recruiting the best possible staff available, to ensure that year, in tier 2 is not wasted, that players actually get better and develop. And as soon as the ball started rolling with recruitment of different staff and whatnot, it was pretty obvious that I wanted to stay. And the other thing is like friends and family, isn't it? Like, I don't really want to uproot my life. And I've got an Aussie wife that's moved once and is grumpy and don't want to move. She don't want to move to Australia and then move again. And you have partners, and she has a job and all those sorts of things, like my mum and dad have always traveled to come watch me play. Like they get a lot of joy from that. I get a lot of joy from that. If they're trekking to, I don't know, Western Storm or Birmingham or wherever that is, the whole reason is like Yorkshire's home to me, and I'm very loyal, and the people mean a lot to me. So, that was the biggest factor, really.
Yeah, I feel like people don't appreciate enough what pro sports people have to go through when they're making decisions. Like, people only look at it through a purely sporting lens, but actually, as you say, different decisions involve making very different life decisions away from the cricket. Are you going to look for a loan move in 2025 or stay with Yorkshire in tier 2?
I obviously want to be around Yorkshire in terms of the pre-season bit and help, like be around the group and lead the group and stuff like that. I think I'll definitely look to go on loan and try and play tier 1 cricket. Like I said, we'll work through that and see what teams need about, or a senior batter, and if it's a good fit for the team or whatever, then great. If it's something where I go for both formats or maybe one format, but I could easily just play T20s and have a little bit of time off when I come back from Australia and be around the Yorkshire crew and all that sort of stuff. So we're just sort of working through that. And a lot of the teams haven't finished their own recruitment. So, they're not ready to say whether they want a lone player or not, because they actually haven't got their squad together yet with, the players that they want. So I'll certainly try go out on loan. But at this stage, I've got no idea what that sort of looks like. It's just putting out feelers really and seeing what's out there and what's needed.
As we sort of telegraphed a few weeks ago, the T20 World Cup has been moved away from Bangladesh to the UAE. That feels like a sensible decision, just given the uncertainty around what's going on in Bangladesh, and also the lack of communication I think players were getting as well about how safe it was there. Yeah,
I think it's a very wise decision. I think players have enough to worry about in terms of just preparing and playing and being at a World Cup, and then worrying safety and security wise is you're just not willing to. I think people think as athletes, it's like the COVID times. Oh, well, just get on with it. You're an athlete. You've got the best job in the world. But you're still human, and there's got to be a bit of common sense prevails at times. And I think the right decision has been made for sure. It'll change the World Cup in terms of team makeup, tactics. What that will look like now with conditions, especially. You sort of imagined at one point, with it being in Bangladesh, that a lot of teams would maybe exclusively have spin attack, and maybe play one seamer and an all-rounder or something like that. Whereas, conditions will be different. So the makeup of squads and teams would potentially look a bit different. But I think a lot of the girls will be pretty relieved that it's moved.
Yeah, you don't want to have that stress hanging over you at a major tournament. And yeah, it's quite interesting that obviously people will say that the World Cup is still in Asia, so it won't be that different. But you look at the numbers of T20 internationals played in Bangladesh compared to UAE. Bangladesh is particularly low scoring and particularly slow wickets, and in the UAE, seamers have more of a role to play. It'll still be a spin dominated tournament, I'm sure, but probably not in the same way as it would have been had it been held in Bangladesh as originally planned. 2 extra bits for you listeners on today's show. First up, we're going to play a chat I had with Nathan Johns, an Irish cricket journalist, about Ireland's 2 successful home series against Sri Lanka. They finished the 2 series with 1 drawn and 1 win, so a big result for Ireland. And Nathan poses the question about where Ireland actually are as a side, especially given the context that they didn't qualify for this year's T20 World Cup, but they do have a very exciting group of young players. After that is played, we'll hear from Katya's interview with Hayley Matthews. It's a fascinating chat. They go back to Matthews' role in their 2016 T20 World Cup victory, where Matthew was just a teenager. And she also talks about the changing landscape in Caribbean cricket, where now she has a very different role in a West Indies side in transition. So for part 2 in the show, we're joined by Nathan Johns to talk all things Ireland, but also London Spirit. You were following the London Spirit closer than most people. A big improvement from 2023 to 2024. What do you put that down to?
Well, variety of things. I think recruitment always helps. They got a lot right with their overseas signings, particularly at the top of the order. Georgia Redmayne, the Aussie keeper, was a bit of a revelation. I think with someone like her who hasn't played international cricket, I mean, for obvious reasons. Alyssa Healy's been wearing the gloves for Australia for God knows how long now. But when someone doesn't play that much international cricket and comes over as an overseas, there could be a bit of an unknown. But she was brilliant. She was their second leading run scorer behind Heather Knight. I think I got that figure right. Meg Lanning probably didn't have the competition she would have wanted, but at the same time, she did come out with a couple of scores. As an overseas, if you win a match or two, you've done your job. And always in these competitions, the domestic players are kind of overrated, and the 2 spinners that they had were vital in Dean and Glenn. Obviously, I think Glenn's second highest wicket taker in the competition. Deepti Sharma as well, scored runs and took wickets. So their England players stepped up, so to speak. The night scored lots of runs, and two of their three overseas performed outstandingly, and the other one did reasonably well.
Yeah, I mean, just look at their bowling attack. It's an international quality bowling attack. You mentioned the England spinners in Dean and Glenn, Deepti Sharma as well, but you've got Danny Gibson, Tara Norris, and Eva Gray is someone who I guess isn't talked about that much, but she's someone who only just turned 24 years old, has played pretty much every year in the 100, always gets wickets, never goes for that many runs. So I guess they had all bases covered, and you're right to pick out Redmayne, who had an outstanding competition. I guess it just shows how good Australia are. She could be basically the best player in the 100, but she's never played for Australia.
They've got a gun left-handed opener. She can't get a game.
Moving on to Ireland. So in Ireland have just played 2 white ball series against Sri Lanka, and they finished it unbeaten. They won one of the series, drew the other. How big a result is that for Ireland? And in terms of looking back, how big does it compare to other big Ireland wins in women's cricket?
Well, it's fascinating because I think when they've had those euphoric highs in the past, like going to Pakistan and winning a T20 series, or knocking off Australia in a World Cup warm-up game, they've always come kind of crashing back down to earth. That World Cup was a bit of a disaster. They didn't win a single game, and they were absolutely expected to. Then they went to the West Indies and didn't win a game on a lengthy tour there. So the fact that they won that second T20, they leveled a 2-match T20 series. They've got their big win over a bigger nation, so to speak, at home. And then they followed up by winning the next 2 ODIs. That hasn't happened really in this kind of Ed Joyce post-COVID era. So they backed it up. They showed consistency. And equally, they did so without some of their bigger players. I mean, the knock on this Irish team for the last 2 to 3 years has been they'll only go as far as their top 3 batters will take them. So that's Gabby Lewis, Amy Hunter, and Orla Prendergast, 2 or 3 outstanding talents, on their day, would be up there with what the best players of what most other countries have, and they're all under the age of 23. I think Gabby might be 23, but the rest of them are younger. But the depth behind that wasn't there. So if you're 20 for 3, they're struggling. And that didn't happen in this Sri Lanka series. Lewis was injured. Prendergast took the reins. She didn't get any runs in that second. She got 100 in the first ODI, fair enough, match-winning knock. Second ODI, she doesn't get any runs. Hunter gets a 60, but then 2 middle-order players also get 50s to see them over the line. That is massive. Rebecca Stokel and Leah Paul did that. If those types of players who they've invested a lot of time in, those are 2 ex-top-order players who they've put into the middle order because they've gone, right, you guys obviously aren't going to open the batting with the caliber of player we have, but if you can turn your skills into being, high-scoring middle-order players, we all of a sudden have a really good lineup. It's taken a couple of years for that to come through. Now, it's only happened really in 1 game now recently. But from the Irish point of view, you're looking at that, right, well, if they can just plug in the gaps when that top 3 doesn't fire, all of a sudden you've got a top 5 that it looks pretty good on paper.
How good is Prendergast?
Excellent. Yeah, I've said this for a long time now. I think especially from an English context, because she's played a lot more domestically over here. Gabby Lewis was always the player that kind of got English heads turning, and she played in the first ever 100 final at Lord's. She opened the batting for the Brave, so she's very well known here. She's always been known as that young talent. She still is an excellent player, but I just think Prendergast as the all-rounder,
it feels like she's come through almost sneakily. Like if we go back to her start of her international career, she wasn't pulling up trees in the same way that Lewis was, and they're similarly aged.
Similarly aged. I think Lewis started a lot younger. I think Lewis was probably 13 or 14 when she debuted, as most of the kind of crop of excellent Irish players have. We were talking about a few other names earlier who've done similar. Prendergast wouldn't have been that young. She played a lot of football as a teenager. By all accounts, probably could have had an international football career.
Wow.
If she wanted, which was an interesting side note last year when a lot of players her age were going to the Women's World Cup in football as the first Irish team to do so. She picked cricket. And she has had a bit of injuries earlier on in her career. We probably haven't seen her flourish as a bowler as much as a batter, even though she is quite quick and bowls these big booming in-swingers. So there's a lot of talent there as well. So it's a combination of factors, but you're right. Now that she's kind of come onto the scene, she's had 2 or 3 years consistently, all of a sudden she scored a lot of runs and people have taken notice. Look, she's an all-rounder. She's a really aggressive player. She's probably the best ball striker Ireland have, and she's also their quickest bowler. So, you've got someone who whacks it and bowls fast.
Yeah. Where are Ireland at? Because they're not at the World Cup yet. This is one of their biggest set of series wins. Because on one side, that sounds like they're probably at a low ebb. But actually, when you look at their team, they're doing pretty well at the moment.
It's bizarre. That qualifier, I think, just goes to show the brutal nature of those ICC qualifier events. And probably, again, as always with these things, there's an argument to put more teams into these competitions. They lost a one-off knockout game. I think it was the semi-final of that qualifying event to Scotland.
Yeah, so basically you had to win your semi-final to qualify for the World Cup.
Classic kind of two finalists go through. Ireland played really well all competition. I think Lewis and Hunter at the opening partnership kind of flayed everyone to all parts.
Yeah.
And then they come up against Scotland, and I think what we talked about earlier, they were, nothing for three. Basically, the three most dominant players gone. The depth wasn't there to get them over the line. By contrast, Scotland's Bryce sisters played excellently and got them through. Pound for pound, are Ireland a better team than Scotland? I think so. They're a much better team, I think, even though the personnel is similar to the one that actually did play in the 2023 T20 World Cup. So it's a really strange one. I think on talent and ability and probably form, barring one game, they deserve to be at that World Cup. But of course, you lose that one game, you don't deserve to be there. So it's a bizarre one. They were absolutely gutted. I know Ed Joyce was completely crestfallen, the head coach, after that. And yet here they are winning series, and more importantly, not losing series against the Asia Cup champions. So it's a really strange dynamic, and I think goes to show the importance of that one game they lost.
The comparison with Scotland's quite interesting because Scotland are obviously not full members, so their best players can play domestically in England without being overseas players. So use the example of the Bryces. Before we started recording, you made the point that they were almost like more battle ready given how much high quality domestic cricket they were playing. How has full membership affected the women's side in Ireland? Because when full membership is talked about, it's genuinely talked about the men's side of things, first of all. How has it affected the women's team? It's
definitely been detrimental up until this year. I remember talking to a player about it a couple of years ago, and this is before Ireland's funding hike happened this year, so it remains to be seen what happens with that. But this conversation a couple of years ago, the line was Test cricket has literally done nothing for, or full membership, I should say, has done nothing for Irish women's cricket. At least with they get turfed out of all these domestic competitions. Not that the women weren't in the English system to the extent that the men were, but as the English system has built up, like we said, Gabby Lewis has got the odd gig here and there. If she was a local or she was an overseas player, she'd be playing every year. Likewise, so would Prendergast, injury permitting, given what's happened in her career so far. And at least with the men, when that happened, you had a test match a year, or when they didn't have that 4-year gap, you had something to look forward to. Obviously, the state of test for cricket, Ireland are never going to play a women's test anytime soon. So you didn't even get that kind of nostalgic benefit, if that's what you want to call it. So it's been fascinating. Yeah, the Bryce sisters are really interesting. Both of them just played in the 100. No Irish player in the 100, even though, like I said, Lewis, Hunter, Prendergast are all certainly good enough to do it. Probably a combination of they haven't played enough cricket recently to be noticed. Ireland haven't, prior to the Sri Lanka series, they hadn't played since that qualifier in May. And also the Sri Lanka series clashed with the 100. So the odds of getting an NOC, maybe for the first half of the tournament, teams maybe didn't like that availability. So, yep, it's been pretty brutal.
So what does Amy Hunter do to get better?
That's fascinating, isn't it? Because she's Northern Irish, right? So there was the big conversation years ago about how someone like Paul Sterling or other Northern Irish players should be kicking up a massive fuss at being told that they have British passports but cannot play in the UK unless they are classed as overseas players. So
a lot of listeners won't be aware of this. So effectively, Northern Irish players should legally be treated the same as anyone else from the UK, but are treated as overseas in the current English domestic system. Is that right?
Because they play for a full member nation, which is Ireland, because Ireland is a full north and south cross-border team. So it's a fascinating discussion, because it's something about that is going to become relevant again with the Olympics, and who would you play for Ireland, who do you play for Team GB as cricket becomes more relevant in that space. But maybe a conversation for a different day. But yeah, these guys are eligible for both Irish passports and UK passports because they're born in Northern Ireland. Most of them, as far as I gather, do have UK passports, if not both. I know lots of people from the north who take advantage of, especially post-Brexit, get both passports. And they've been told, right, you play for Ireland, you play for another full member nation. you cannot play in England as a local player. Cricket Ireland at the time did lobby the ECB to say, can you not make an exception? Like, we don't have the domestic pathways in men's cricket, let alone women's cricket, to develop these guys without county cricket. We're going to really struggle. And the ECB at the time said, well, it's not our job to develop Irish cricketers. Be fascinating if that conversation happened now, when you've got people like Richard Gould talking about how important it is to develop less well-off nations, but that's the way it happened. And so it took all the men out of county cricket, barring a couple of exceptions. George Dockrell's playing for Lancs in the Blast this year, is one notable one. But on the women's side of things, there are fewer teams anyway to play for. So if there are fewer teams and you're in overseas, and they might want to spend their overseas money on a more high-profile West Indian or whoever it is, a Hayley Matthews, you're going to struggle.
I wonder if it's more likely to happen in women's cricket than in the men's game, but also because right now we're going through a transition. It's becoming more professional, but also it's decentralized. You've got directors of cricket in charge of different regions, these new counties, and they're going to want the best players possible. And I wonder if actually it's a director of cricket in the women's game who knocks on the ECB's door and say, hang on, I want Amy Hunter. Amy Hunter's really good. I want Amy Hunter back in the top 3. And I wonder if, because this has been an issue in the men's game for pushing 5 years, and there've been whispers around things changing, but nothing's actually happened for quite a long time. But let's say Amy Hunter doesn't play English domestic cricket as a local player. What does she do to get better? Is this a major problem for Ireland, in that the best young players, the players from the south, are unable to play a significant body of cricket against high quality opposition to improve?
Well, she needs a lot of things to go her way. She needs to score a hell of a lot of runs at the right time. So in the month or so leading up to an auction or a draft of one of the big competitions, to prove that she's good enough to take up an overseas slot. She's only 18. She's already scored, I think, two international hundreds, both against Zimbabwe, funnily enough. But even when she played against England at the World Cup, there was flashes there. It's a good question. If Ireland don't play any games in the lead up to the BBL draft or an IPL auction or whatever it is, she's out of sight, out of mind. Unless you are the most stringent follower of all cricket matches, which, as sometimes we see from franchise recruitment decisions, it looks like some of them aren't. You're not going to get noticed. You're not going to get picked up. Ireland aren't at the T20 World Cup. She's not going to do what Josh Little did a couple of years ago and have a really good World Cup just before an IPL auction and therefore get picked up. So it's really hard. She needs a good agent as well. I think her agent is actually Niall O'Brien, who has a good rep with getting franchise gigs. He's, Sterling's and Little's agent, as those guys get lots of gigs. So maybe that's a good step. But yeah, it's fascinating because Ireland are playing more cricket now. I think they go to India this year, which is an interesting one. Who knows? Maybe she scores a whole load of runs in India and gets a last minute replacement gig in the IPL or something like that.
Well, that'd be a good place to score runs. On great Irish talents, probably top of the list is Kim Garth, who now opens the bowling for Australia more often than not. She's still only in her 20s. Do you think Irish cricket is in a place now with the professional contracts to stop a situation like that happening again, where a top player seeks a move abroad for opportunities?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, Orla Prendergast plays for Ireland now.
Yeah.
She doesn't play for England. She doesn't play for whoever it is.
Do you think 5 years ago that would be a real danger?
100%. Absolutely. So I think prior to 2022, I was looking at numbers here, there would have been about 7 women who had contracts. Whether you could call them full-time or not is probably open to debate, and the salaries would not have been very good. 2022, they bring in widespread professional contracts. I think about 15 or 16 players, most of whom would have been on educational part-time contracts, so they could stay at uni, they could stay at school, because the side is so young, it still is really young. And then about 5 or 6 would have been full-time professionals. Still not paid a lot of money back then. This year, salaries did increase slightly, not sure to what extent. But the great sadness and irony, if you want to call it, of that was 2022 was when Kim Garth qualified for Australia and made her debut after sacrificing her Ireland career 3 years earlier, the 3-year stand-down period, as it's known. And there is a kind of like a wistful, if these contracts were in place 3 years ago when she made the decision to move to Australia, to not play for Ireland for 3 years, to play for Victoria, to play in the WBBL, would she have stayed? And it's a fascinating question. The facilities haven't improved greatly. they train more because they have contracts, and you see what's happened in the 2 to 3 years since that has happened. Ireland have improved exponentially. But would that have been able to compete with, you can play as a local in at the top, what was at the time the best women's T20 competition in the world, and you have a chance of playing for the best women's team in the world? Probably not. I mean, Garth has won a T20 World Cup since then. She made the right call. But there is a case of, what might have been given those contracts came in just at the wrong time for her.
Yeah, and I guess it's as well, it's the security, even if you're not playing for Australia. It's that you can have a career. We were talking about Georgia Redmayne earlier. You can have a very successful career in Australia without playing for Australia. And I guess there's a stability that Australia offers in a way that even now, maybe Ireland can't.
Yeah, well, I mean, if there's no question that Kim Garth would have been on an Ireland contract, that's for sure. But yeah, you're right. If you're not on an Ireland contract as a player, you either need to be like in school or in uni, still living with your parents, basically, to make it work. You can't be a 25-year-old non-contracted player who all of a sudden decides, I'm going to have a go at playing for Ireland. Because first of all, if you're any good and any close, they probably will give you a piecemeal contract. Is it enough to live on? Probably not. But yeah, you couldn't do that without significant family or financial support. It's why you don't see anyone doing it. I mean, I was looking at this the other day. I think there's only 2 players in the Ireland squad who are over the age of 25 at the minute. One of whom is the captain, Laura Delaney, who's been playing for years, and the other one is Arlene Kelly, who played a lot of cricket in New Zealand before she came over. You don't have anyone who's gone quite late into this Irish side, just because you can't financially make it work.
I was just looking up Kim Garth's numbers since playing for Australia. 22 wickets at 14 in ODI cricket.
She opened the bowling in the Ashes, didn't she?
Yeah. I mean, she's played 3 Test matches as well.
There you go. There. That's the clincher. She played in the Ashes here. I know her parents flew over from Dublin to watch their daughter play Ashes cricket and Test match cricket. Like, obviously, that just never would have been possible if she had stayed in Ireland. So there's no question that she made the right decision and she's made it work.
We talked earlier about where Ireland are at. What is the goal? We've seen in a series against Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, a side that challenged the best teams in the world, they turned over England in similar conditions to where they played Ireland only last year. Obviously, you've got the top teams who feel like they're actually getting further away given the money that's been poured into England, Australia, and India. But what about the sides below? Is it realistic for Ireland to be challenging those sides in the near future?
Yeah, absolutely.
And should there be should the goal be like a proper World Cup run?
Yeah, well, the goal is to get to an ODI World Cup, I think. Absolutely. They're bottom of the women's championship at the minute. They've only just got their first win in that competition over Sri Lanka, so maybe that goal is further away mathematically than it would be based on talent at the minute, just because they've been such a young developing side over the last couple of years, and it's shown in their results. But absolutely, there's absolutely no reason why they can't look at themselves and go, right, in a couple of years when we're not just reliant on 3 players completely, like we said, that process has already improved. Our bowlers are a little bit older and more experienced. One of our young spinners comes good and can hold up an end. There's no reason why we can't put those batters in the best position to score enough runs to mean that on any given day they can be the best of the rest. Absolutely see no problems with that. I mean, South Africa obviously got to a T20 final in recent years, but if you look at the scope of a country like Ireland to grow, given men's and women's, they've always produced some top talent without the best infrastructures, the best playing facilities. All these countries have much better facilities. Ireland have only just brought in professional contracts, and we've seen the growth in the less than 3 years that's happened. I think when you put all that together, and look, they've got really lucky, and 3 of the best batters they'll ever produce have all come along, and they're all within 5 years of each other. Ireland have the greatest scope for growth, I think, out of countries ranked 4 to 10 in the world, because their facilities will only get better. Their players will only get better now they have contracts. They will catch up quickly.
And they've got a young core.
Like I said. I think they've only got 2 players over the age of 25. One of whom, the captain Delaney, they won those ODIs without her because she was injured. Do you know what I mean? Like, she's a vitally important player, but she's not as important as a Prendergast, right? Yeah. Talent-wise, I think. They have the greatest scope for growth and improvement, I think. And will they get to a stage where they'll be consistently better than everyone else? Probably not. Because of structures, facilities, pathways, all that type of stuff. They're only ever 2 or 3 injuries away from, right, go beat Sri Lanka in a World Cup game rather than an ODI series at home in conditions that Sri Lanka don't really like. They'll always be not a million miles away from that, but will they be in a position where fully fit, fully firing, they can beat anyone outside the top 3 on their day? Yeah, and I don't think they're that far away from getting to that. We were talking about, putting stuff out there and work. I wrote something recently that kind of said, look, well, if you were Ireland, I'm looking at Olympics in 4 years' time. We don't know how that's going to work. 6 teams, is going to be rankings, is going to be 4 teams in rankings and 2 teams qualifiers, whatever it is. But Ireland should absolutely look at that in 4 years' time and say there is absolutely no reason why we can't be in the top 6 ranked T20 teams in the world in 4 years' time. And that's quite exciting because you can't say that about the men. So, it's there are fewer teams pump money into women's cricket as they do. So if you look at Ireland now investing in it,
it makes sense.
There's no reason why they can't climb that ladder pretty quickly.
Yeah. And finally, a figure who's been a big part of the Irish women's cricket story over the last few years is Ed Joyce, a familiar name to many, I'm sure. Talk me through what he's done in the last few years and what pivotal role he's played.
He's an absolutely fascinating character and story, and one that hasn't actually been told that much in definitely over here.
I always think that Ed Joyce, there are, I like my stats, and in men's cricket, Joyce's record in first class cricket was just absurdly good for so long.
Well, there was a while there, wasn't there?
Basically averaged 50. I'm just looking now. He averaged 48 in first class cricket over 255 games. Played ODI cricket for England sort of unsuccessfully, but that was in an era where they would blood in guys who were test prospects in the ODI side, basically.
Well, there was that period, there was that season where he scored all those runs for Sussex. I think he was top scorer in the champ.
Yeah.
It was just after Strauss retired, and he'd already gone back to Ireland by this stage. And I think there was a kind of a consensus view that if he hadn't gone back to Ireland, he really would have been in with a shout to open the batting for England alongside Alistair Cook in a test match, because that was when England were just churning through openers to partner Cook.
Yeah.
So yeah, really interesting guy. Obviously had an excellent career. Probably the best batter Ireland produced, according to a lot of people. A lot of people look at what Morgan achieved in white ball cricket and go, what about him? But in terms of, classic, easy on the eye, left-handers who scored a whole lot of red ball runs, many people think Ed Joyce is the best they've produced. Took up a batting consultant role with the men's team after retiring. Graham Ford got him in. And kind of then was just in the right place at the right time, receiving checks from Cricket Ireland when all of a sudden they needed a women's coach. And I don't think he knew a lot about women's cricket at the time. He's kind of openly said he had to lean on his 2 sisters who played for Ireland, Isabel and Cecilia Joyce, to kind of find out who the players were. A lot of the players were, but has taken to the job brilliantly. Has been in the job for a while now, but Ireland's batters are all of a sudden look like $1 million, like the likes of Prendergast and stuff that seem to have flourished under him. He's definitely been the batting kind of coach. I think he knows his limitations, and he's brought other people in to coach different areas of the game. But yeah, he's taken a very, very young group of players, quite a challenge in and of itself. He's guided them through the early stages of professionalism, and under his watch, they're winning a lot more games against better teams than they used to. So it's a fascinating story. I think if you asked him towards the end of his playing career, do you envision becoming the head coach of your women's side? I don't think he would have said yes, but after being in the right place at the right time and getting the gig, he's flourished. He loves it. He loves that group of players. Wears his heart on his sleeve. Like I said earlier, I think he really, really took that T20 qualifier defeat badly. He was in a dark place over that, as I'm sure all of them were. But yeah, and the brand of cricket as well. He's got them playing this aggressive, go out and try and score boundaries cricket, which is obviously synonymous with white ball cricket these days. But for an Ireland women's side that historically have not done that, that's really important and a really big development. It's interesting because now that he's had so much success, I think 2022, end of 21 or early 22, the men's job was open, and a lot of people were saying, "Oh, give it to Ed Joyce." And I don't know this; I didn't speak to him about it, but I got the sense that he didn't necessarily see that as the step up that it would be from the women's gig. I think he really likes what he's doing. He has this project with these players. He probably does want to get them to an ODI World Cup, if not the Olympics in 4 years' time. And he really wants to see that through.
Well, it sounds like a fascinating time for Irish cricket. Nathan, thank you so much for coming on.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
In 2020, 2022, Welsh Fire had a really, really difficult season. But last year and this year, you've been consistently at the top or near the top of the table. You've been with the Welsh Fire since the beginning for 4 years. What changed in that kind of break from 2022 to 23 to suddenly be consistently at the top of the table?
Yeah, I think realistically, we had a lot of really good local players come in. I always find playing franchise cricket that it's the local players that really makes up the best teams. And, you know, we were able to have additions. Obviously, Tommy was there. We had Dunkley come in, you know, Georgia Elwes, Freya Davies. So we had a lot of really big additions from the England side that I think was able to help with our depth a lot. Sarah Bryce, she's been fantastic for us this year, and the way she's improved over the years as well. So I think those additions have made a big difference, and just the way that the team has been able to bond and gel. I think one thing for sure is that there are a lot of good people within the group, and everyone's been able to just come in and be themselves and be happy for each other's success as well.
And as an overseas player, what's your view of the hundreds? We tend to get so wrapped up in England about the discourse of whether the competition's a good thing or not. I think sometimes in that discourse, the women's game gets kind of forgotten. And I think we forget what the baseline, what the tournament offers as a baseline. What's your perspective on it as an overseas player?
I actually really enjoy it. I enjoy playing it. I think it brings a lot of excitement to the game. And I guess the different formats kind of just makes you have to continue to grow as a cricketer. Obviously, you've got the 50 over game. Some teams are playing test now, the T20 format where you've got to speed things up, and then opening up to even the 100 now, where things are even more fast paced. And I think personally for me, it helps my game to continue to grow. And I guess for me to be able to have to adapt in different situations. So I've really enjoyed playing it over the years. I think the crowds that come in bring a lot of excitement as well, and the kind of people it attracts too.
How would you compare the 100 to a tournament like the WCPL?
I think, well, obviously the 100's in its 4th year now. And yeah, like I said, I think it's been marketed really well, and the crowds that have been able to come in has been really exciting. But I think, look, last year was our first big year of WCPL in the Caribbean. And it was actually pretty good to see. I think usually when we do play in the Caribbean, we don't get very many people coming in, and we were able to get quite a few. I think that final in Trinidad, there were thousands of people there watching by the end of the match. So I think WCPL is growing, and I'm really excited for how it's going to be this year. Obviously, we've got some massive names coming in. JJ from over here at Welsh Fire, obviously Aussie player, she's going to be there. Meg Lanning, one of the biggest names in the game, and so many others. You know, we had Wellington last year. Atupatu's going to be over. So I think the tournament's going to be even better. And I think from the last time we had our trial matches to that year in CPL last year, being the 2nd year, and now this year, we're going to just be able to see continuous growth, hopefully.
And you mentioned with the 100, something that made Welsh Fire stronger was the domestic players coming in. How do you see the WCPL as expanding the experience of domestic players in the West Indies?
Yeah, really good. I think, look, when you kind of look at our different levels of cricket, we've got our regional competition where we've got about 5 or 6 teams. And I think Cricket West Indies and CPL purposely put 3 teams in the competition, and allowing for internationals to come in to kind of have that tournament. I guess that's like bridging the gap between our regional tournament and international cricket, and trying to, I guess, create a standard in the middle there that's going to help our girls to really improve. And like I said, last year it was really, really good to see the kind of scores that were happening. You know, finals, we made it about 170. And Guyana were able to nearly chase it down. So I think that was great to see, and hopefully we can see even bigger stuff going on this year too.
Of the domestic players currently in the West Indies who perhaps haven't played international cricket yet, who are the next? Shemaine Campbell, Stefani Taylor, Hayley Matthews, who's coming through?
Oh, I don't know if I've got any names specifically. We've obviously got a lot of young girls that have been in and out to the team recently. Zeta James, Janaba Joseph, a lot of young girls that have just been in and out. Munisar, budding off spinner. So I think we've got a lot of talents at those levels coming through. I think for us, it's just about nurturing those girls and getting them in the right environments and just getting them playing a lot of cricket at the moment. I think thankfully all the girls at the moment are in camp and working really hard. I think they're playing a lot of T10 matches and T20 matches, just getting ready for the T20 World Cup. With a lot of those girls, I guess, on the outskirts of the team being a part of that camp as well, and getting that experience too. So hopefully they can learn from players like Shemaine Campbell and Stefani Taylor and myself when I am around, and hopefully we can help to improve their growth a lot quicker.
And looking at your own performances for the West Indies over the last couple of years, it's been an incredible kind of 2.5 years for you. No one scored more runs than you at a higher average or strike rate in T20 eyes in that time. You have almost triple the runs in that format than your closest teammate. Do you ever feel like there's pressure, particularly with the bat, that it's almost all on you?
I would say probably in previous times, I think especially when Steph was injured, that it did feel like that at one point. However, I think we've really been able to get a lot of the girls into a position. I think Shemaine Campbell, she's really stepped up. We've seen Aaliyah Ali start to step up with the bat. Steph is back and doing really well again. So I feel as though over the last 2 years, the girls have really been able to grow and find their own. And I think they've been able to formulate a plan on how to score runs and how they want to score their runs as well, which has been really good and helped a lot with their consistency. And I think it's definitely helped me a lot to be able to free up more and not have to worry about scoring all the runs in the T20 format. Especially, I think, even when we looked at our Sri Lanka series just now, I did get player of the series when we won 3 matches, but I didn't get a single player of the match award in that series as well, which means that we still do have players that are coming and having those match-winning performances now, which is something that we probably didn't see as often in the past. So I would say the girls are definitely stepping up and getting better in that regards, and I can definitely appreciate it, not only as captain, but as a batter as well.
Must be a strange feeling for you not going up to get the player of the match awards. Like, what was it, 7 on the trot at one point?
Yeah, I think it was like when we were in Oz, it was like 8 or 9 or something like that. But yeah, I don't know if I'll ever be hitting that number again. It's pretty unbelievable, to be fair.
Yeah. We recently had Shamari Aspatu on the podcast, and she said that she thrived under the pressure of knowing that a lot of the responsibility with the bat was on her. When you felt like that, when you had the pressure with you on the bat, like you said, did you feel like you thrived under that, or was that something that you really didn't enjoy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the scores I had during the time would probably say that I did thrive under it. But look, I think even just as a leader within the team, and having that responsibility, I do want to go out there and score runs and do well, and I do want to be the one performing really well. And yeah, it helps when we have girls around who are doing well, and I'd obviously take that as much as I can possibly get it. But I think having others around me scoring runs doesn't make me feel any less like I need to go out there and get the job done. And I feel like I've done really well, kind of putting that responsibility on my back and I guess trying to get the job done and taking it really deep each time I do go to the crease.
You were named Wisden's leading T20I cricketer in the world earlier this year. And we've already touched on that series in Australia with the Player of the Match awards. But during that series, you averaged 88 with the bat and 12 with the ball. What does a run like that feel like? For context, part of that for listeners was 99 not out and 132 in a match win in Sydney, and then 79 in the final game, as well as 5 wickets. It kind of appears like you're just kind of playing on easy mode.
It was quite, I think, unbelievable for me as well. Just heading down to Oz, I was very nervous. Obviously, you're playing against the best team in the world. You don't know what to expect. I hadn't played an international series for a little while, so I wasn't sure how I was going to do, obviously, against competition like them. I knew I had a good shots, and heading down to Australia, you usually get very good wickets to bat on. But I definitely wasn't expecting to score over 300 runs in 3 T20 matches for sure. But yeah, no, it was honestly a dream. I think just heading down there and being able to perform so well, I think you can only kind of dream of that form. So yeah, just to be able to go out there and do it was quite unbelievable. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was on a high and loving every moment on the field, loving the moments with the girls after the games. I think after we chased on that 212, we just had a great time celebrating each other's success. Obviously, Steph played a big role in that. And I think even players like Shamelia Connell played a huge role throughout that series with the ball. So I think we were just all happy for what we were able to achieve. I know we didn't necessarily win the series, but I think to go down there and challenge Oz the way we did, winning that second game, creating history by winning that second game, and then putting ourselves in a really strong position in that third game as well, was probably something we never expected to do well in Oz.
What does it feel like to beat Australia? Because obviously they're the benchmark which others tend to be measured against. And when you're not expected to beat them, what does that feel like?
Yes, definitely. I think when we do play them, we kind of go out and feel like we've got absolutely nothing to lose, No one's expecting us to come up against them and win any game. So I think one thing we just try to instill is to just go out and be really fearless. And yeah, definitely does put you on a high when you're beating, I guess, the supposed best team in the world, and especially the way we did, I think is something. I think for us, it's a day that we'll always remember, a night we'll always remember, I should say, and one we'll cherish, because at the end of the day, it is in the history books, and we did do something pretty special that day.
And also going into the T20 World Cup in a couple of months' time, it's a bank of form or a bank of results to build off.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, look, T20 World Cup especially, I think, is one that can literally go either way. I think the T20 format now, it takes one or two big performances on a day from a player to win a match. So literally you can go into any match against any team, and you're going to have to play really good cricket if you want to win. And it means that teams like ourselves, the underdogs, always have a shot and always have an opportunity. Even when we won in 2016, no one was expecting us to beat New Zealand in the semi-finals. No one was expecting us to beat us in the finals. And it just took two really special performances to do it. And I think if we kind of carry that into this World Cup, just knowing that every single day someone's going to have to step up to the plate really big. And it's not always going to be my day or Steph's day or Campbell's day, but if one of us can always step up to that plate and have everyone around us supporting, we can definitely do some shocking things, hopefully.
You mentioned 2016 there. What are your memories of that tournament that the West Indies won back in 2016 when the double men's and women's won?
I was so young. I think I was 17 at the time, just turning 18. So it's still kind of like all a blur. And it was my first World Cup as well. So I just remember going out there and wanting to enjoy myself. I think that's when I was still playing cricket and not thinking about planning out the innings, like just going out, enjoying myself, having fun, batting. And I do remember the finals, and it set, I think, 149 or 150, somewhere around there. And I think at the time that was a massive score in women's cricket as well. Heading out to bat, I was very nervous. I think I even dropped the bat on the floor, like while I was at the crease trying to take guard. And after the first 3 overs, we were 9 runs, I believe, chasing that score. And I think went down to Steph, and I pretty much said, look, I'm just gonna have a swing here and hope that it all goes well. And yeah, thankfully for me, and I guess thankfully for the team, it started coming out to the middle of the bat a bit and just kind of flowed. But yeah, once again, I think it's just one of those nights where we were able to create history, and the 19 boys won earlier on in the year. Then we were able to win when we were not in the cards to win, and then our men were able to win in the fashion that they did too. I think that's honestly something that might never happen again. Like, first of all, you've got to have 3 World Cups in the same year. And then for the same team to win all 3 is just unbelievable. And I think too, when you look at it and I guess what cricket does for the people of the Caribbean, we're all different countries and we're all different islands, and we all have our own wars against each other for whatever reasons. But the one thing that does bring us all together is cricket. So the fact that we were able to all win it in that year, I know definitely meant a whole lot to the Caribbean, and I think that's what makes it even more special. Even talking to people back home, they still get tears in their eyes just talking about that day, and I guess just knowing that you're a part of something so special is great.
And you mentioned being so young. Is it difficult to win a tournament like that at such a young age, because there's such a high that you then have to chase again?
Yeah, I think I kind of went into it like, geez, it was this easy all along, because I remember talking to the girls after and teasing them a bit and saying, like, y'all been to all these World Cups, you always getting knocked out in the semi-finals and the finals, and look, I just came and we just won the World Cup easy like that. And then reality hit me as the World Cups went on, like a few years later. But yeah, 100%. I think winning a World Cup is probably the epitome for any athlete that plays a sport that has a World Cup. So it's definitely a dream come true to have won it, but it is something that I'd love to do again. And I think that's why it was so heartbreaking in 2018 as defending champions when we were playing at home in the Caribbean and getting knocked out in the semi-finals. I remember just being on the field in tears, heartbroken. But yeah, I think it's still about managing expectations, understanding that only one team can win, but just making sure we all doing the right things in the process to hopefully get us to that result at the end of the day.
Building into this World Cup, there's been a few prominent retirements from the West Indies side over the last 12 months, most notably Deandra Dottin, who is now unretired and is available for the West Indies selection going forward. She cited a period of reflection and thoughtful dialogue as enabling her return to international cricket. Were you part of the discussions to bring Deandra back into the West Indies fold?
No, I hadn't spoken to Deandra, I guess, around discussions with her coming back. But one thing I can say is Deandra is one of the players that I know will always be out on the field giving 100% every single time. She's someone that plays really hard, and I think even though she's in camp with the girls and training, so I think that's good to see, just having her back around the group, and hopefully she's able to come back and feel comfortable and fit in really well.
And for context, Deandra Dottin has scored 2,681 runs in T20s for the West Indies, only second to Stefani Taylor. So it's an incredible addition to have back into the side only a few months before the World Cup.
Yeah, 100%. It definitely adds to the team and what we can bring, especially in a tournament like a World Cup. She's a match winner, and yeah, she's obviously in camp now with the team. And then we've got the WCPL as well, where I think everyone will have a look at her and yeah, see how it goes from there.
That is everything for today's show. Cheers, Lauren. Enjoy the Caribbean. Enjoy it whilst it lasts, and hope it stops raining. This has been the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast. The Metro Bank Girls in Cricket Fund, championing the Future Hub, contains loads of top tips and learnings from cricket clubs that are creating the perfect environment for their girls' teams. Create your login and check out the case studies at icoachcricket.ecb.co.uk or find out more about the fund at metrobankonline.co.uk/cricket.